But when you're able to teach people and realize that you can change their path and their trajectory and that you have an impact, that's, I think, what sealed the deal for me with education. I think really seeing that education can not only plant a seed, but that having those relevant educational experiences is what is really transformative. So we've tried to look at it with an open mind, that it's not going anywhere. So we're really have honest conversations with our students about why it's still important to learn how to write and establish your own voice. And I did a book study, and the kids, they were 10th graders, they were all in like learning circles. And normally, they'd be talking about the book or have these little discussion questions. And this one group was dead silent. And I walked over and I was like, all right, y'all, this is great. Nobody's talking. And they're like, we are talking. And I was like, there's no sound coming out of any of your mouths. And they're like, no, we're talking on the Google Doc. So they were sitting in this little circle, but they were just talking to each other over a Google document. And I realized right then and there, I was like, okay, this is really different. But that's what they had to do during the pandemic. There's still an educational piece to it, but I think it's really important to be intentional about connection because our world is different.
Every leader has a story to tell, and the Safe Leader podcast uncovers the diversity story behind leading figures championing change to make our world a better place. Join me, your host, Mark McBride-Wright, as we hear from business leaders, academics, entrepreneurs, and agents of change as they share their journeys of innovation, resilience, and transformation. Together, we explore how they embrace the principles of safe leadership, sharing, acting, feeling, and empowering to create safer, more inclusive environments for everyone. Hello, welcome to the next episode of the Safe Leader podcast. I'm your host, Mark McBride-Wright, and today we're joined by Dr Meghan Waldron, who is an educator, advisor and founder with over 2 decades of experience supporting students, educators and emerging leaders. She currently serves as Senior Pre-Professional Health Minor Advisor and Adjunct Professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, where she guides students navigating complex academic and career pathways in healthcare and beyond. Alongside her academic work, Meghan is the founder of Smart Solutions, a tutoring business specialising in writing instruction for students in grades 3 to 12. Through this work, she has helped thousands of learners build confidence, communication skills and academic resilience, particularly during critical stages of their development. More recently, Meghan founded the US Hub of Women in Change, a global network focused on uplifting and connecting women leaders committed to driving meaningful impact in their organisations and communities. Her work sits at the intersection of education, leadership and empowerment, with a clear mission to help individuals realise their potential and create positive, lasting change. Meghan, or Meg, actually, I'm seeing Meg on. What do you prefer? Meg.
Meg is fine. That's fine. Yeah.
Meg.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us. So, at the Safe Leader podcast, we like to find out a bit about the person in front of us, the inspiration, the motivation, the stuff that drove you to do what you're doing today. So if we get in that unyet invented time machine and go back and meet the young Meg. Tell us about the young Meg. Are you doing now what you thought you would be doing? What was your inspiration? What were you like?
No, not at all.
Give us a feeling. No?
Yeah, so my mom was an educator. She was a PE teacher and worked at the school right down the street from me. And I thought, there's no way I'm going in education. I'm going to go in a different route. And I actually studied English and Spanish as an undergrad and moved out to California. Actually worked on a boat first, which that was a random segue, but then moved out to California and worked at a restaurant and then started teaching adult education. And I thought, oh, darn, I love this. And the rest is history. I have been teaching ever since. So that was in 1999. So that was the beginning.
What were you doing on a boat?
So I worked on a parasailing boat, and when I graduated on the Outer Banks, a lot of students will move there and work, summer jobs. So It was actually really cool. The guy called us when we were in college, and he said, I've never had a girl work on the boat. He hired 2 of us. And I remember him saying, do you act like or he said, "Are you a girly girl?" And I was like, "Okay, well, I don't really know what that means, but I'm pretty sure that's not a question you can ask from an HR standpoint." But I think he was trying to ask if we were tough enough to work on a boat with all these guys. But yeah, it was very
Oh, I
character
see.
building and very humbling. So it was short lived,
I
but a good
see.
experience.
And what did you do in adult education?
Yeah.
Were you sort of teaching evening classes or
I
something?
was.
Like what was
Yes,
that?
right. It was just a small language school in San Diego. Most of our students were from Europe and from Asian countries, and they were coming to the States pretty much to learn business English.
Okay.
And so we were, introducing them to American customs and colloquialism and all of that. So I did not go back. I went back to get a master's in education and then started teaching in the classroom. But that was kind of my
I
first
see.
introduction to teaching.
And how did the experience that you'd had prior to that, how did that, like customer service, waiting on the boat, and all the other things that I'm sure you did, how did that set you up then for being in front of the class? Was it that
Right.
experience of being in front of the adult learners that you thought, gosh, I like this, I'm good at it, I enjoy it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think anyone that's ever taught or coached in any capacity, when you see that light bulb moment and you see that you can really help move the needle for somebody else, I think
Okay.
I've always been a very human centered person. I like connecting with people. But when you're able to teach people and realize that you can change their path and their trajectory and that you have an impact, that's, I think, what sealed the deal for me with education.
And when you then go on and decide to specialize in to become an educator in
Right.
terms of the primary education or the gateway to just general learning of the foundations that people then build upon subsequently as they get older,
Sure.
what how did you find your degree course? You said you went back to school,
Yeah,
to uni to get your master's.
I
What
did.
did you specialize? Do you specialize in something, or I'm
So
not
it's a little
familiar?
bit different. I think now I think there is more of a concentration. So when I went back, I did an accelerated degree program. So honestly, Mark, when I came back, I knew that I wanted to be a teacher. I remember I was driving back cross country. I was with my best friend, and you have lots of time to reflect. And I knew I was going to go back for grad school, but I wasn't really sure what. And I actually landed a temp job at a university and
Okay.
befriended a bunch of professors that were like, if you really liked teaching, like, why don't you look at teaching? We have some areas that were they're called Title I schools here in the States. So they're schools that are, have different resources. And so they were funding students to go back and get a master's to teach in these high need schools.
Oh, I see. Right.
So I wasn't prepared for what I was walking into. I grew up in a very suburban area with a lot of resources, and I was put in a really high need school right on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. I was 21 years old. I had no idea what I was doing. So I was earning my
Wow.
master's at night. I was working full time at this school during the day. We had 81 languages spoken at this school, a very transient
Wow.
population, some gang issues and things like that. So, I mean, I learned so much in that building, and I have friendships that have remained, and I have students that I keep in contact with 20 plus years later. Well, 30, I guess almost 30 years now. So, I mean, I think it was not anything I'd really planned out, but it definitely, that first school really was the foundation for me.
You were probably learning more in the classroom as a teacher, and the theory
Yeah,
was just in the evenings,
that was
like
just,
how it
checking
ought to
boxes.
be. But
Yes,
yeah.
yes, for sure. Yeah, and I wasn't, we had a nursery in our high school. So my first class was ninth grade students, and some of my students would drop off their children and then come to class. They were 14 years old. I was 21. So
Wow.
it was such a huge learning curve for me to understand different, life events that students were dealing with, and then trying to earn their degree on top of that, which now looking back, like, kudos to them. I mean, so many students, the fact that you're coming to school pregnant as a 14 and 15-year-old and still trying to seek your education, it's just really empowering now when I look back. I knew it was special
Yeah.
then, but even more so now, I think.
And because you came from a place with access to
Sure.
resources, or what you'd had resources, what assumptions about education or student potential did you have to unlearn over time?
Yeah, a lot, right? So I think that I grew up in a two-parent household, stable income. My parents were college, well, my mom was college educated. My dad had an associate's degree. So I think I wasn't informed or aware of different hurdles students were jumping in order to just get to school in the morning. We had a large student population of students who were coming from Latin America. We had a large gang presence in some of those schools. The kids were
Oh
coming to the
gosh.
States without their parents, so they're living with relatives. And so, I had to educate myself on lots of different variables of why there was so much truancy, why students were working a couple of jobs and coming to school. So I think I had to unlearn a lot of my own background to understand some of the barriers that some of my students were facing in that environment at that time.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. And was there a particular moment or challenge that made you realise the deeper impact
Yeah.
you could have beyond just teaching content, but
Sure.
actually bring that learning to the students of
Yeah.
everyday life?
I had a phenomenal principal who I still keep in touch with over social media, and he really was a social advocate. He really pushed for equity and access for students before, DEI was a thing. Even I feel like he was on the forefront of that. And he, when I was like 22, came to me and said, "Meg, I think you'd be really good at running the school newspaper." And I was like,
Oh,
"Okay, well, that's something I feel like I could get behind." And so I had just a core group of students, and they would stay after school. So I think, Mark, for me, that was the first time where I really saw relevant learning. So instead of students just reading a poem or studying a short story, they were producing these stories. They were interviewing their peers. They were getting information that was important to their peers and reporting back on it. They were working through the writing process. And then we were print publishing, which now,
oh
I just
wow.
worked in a newspaper or a high school a couple years ago, and they don't print newspapers anymore in high schools. So I think really working with students in that environment, I think I saw for them, some of them ended up going into journalism. Some of them are
Wow.
very successful in the social media world now. They're in their 40s. So I think really seeing that education can not only plant a seed, but that having those relevant educational experiences is what is really transformative.
Yeah, it's so important to have that outlet or that discovery, or just have someone show you different things that you might
Sure.
not readily come across. And I guess so much time now gets filled with digital.
Yes.
There's less analog in life because life is more digital. So yeah, let's come up to today then.
Okay.
So you started teaching at that school in DC whilst progressing your master's,
Sure.
whilst progressing your undergraduate. Have you 100% been a teacher in education since that, or have you had a squiggly career where you've
Yeah.
gone and done different things and come back, or has teaching always been the backbone and you've done some side hustles? Like, give us a
Yeah.
flavour of the tapestry of your career tonight.
Yes, I'm definitely a side hustler. So I taught for 6 years in the classroom, and then my oldest son, who's now 20, when he was born, I stepped away from the classroom, and that's when I launched my tutoring company. So I knew I wanted to stay
Oh,
in
amazing.
education, but I knew I wanted to stay home and raise my son. And I have 3 boys, and they're all very close in age. So for 10 years, I stayed home with them and ran my tutoring company exclusively. So I always had my foot in the educational world and still partnered with schools and things like that. When my youngest went back to kindergarten, I went back in the classroom full time. So always been in the world of education, but kind of in and out in terms of a full-time classroom
Yeah.
teacher.
And let's double click, as people say. I'm not a fan of that phrase, but yeah, let's zoom in on that period of entrepreneurship then. So tell us about your tutoring company.
Yeah, so I was really fortunate when Charlie was born. It's very expensive in DC to have your kids in daycare, so I was able to stay home with him at first. I worked for a couple of nonprofits doing some educational stuff, and then I thought, oh my gosh, why can't I can do this on my own? And we moved to an area about 2 hours from from DC called Richmond, Virginia.
Yeah.
And the cost of living is a little bit less. So I was really fortunate to meet another small business owner. He ran a tutoring company in DC. He told me how he set it up. He had, just didn't have a scarcity mindset. He's like, look, there's plenty of business for everybody. So I started that idea when I was still in DC. When I came to Richmond, I was really able to grow it just because it's easier to get around. There's less traffic and whatnot. As a larger tutoring company closed and went to federal grants, and he gave me all of his private contracts. All of the referrals. So it really helped me kind of start here. And then this is year 19, so it's been going ever since. So.
And is it like all subjects,
Yeah.
or is it just yourself, or do you have like a network of associates or contractors?
Yeah,
who
great question.
You pair?
So when we
Yeah.
first started, it was everything. I thought, I'm going to tutor it all. So I'm not a math and science person. I'm not a STEM person. And you have to, I think, when you're in a small business, you throw a lot of things against the wall and some things don't stick.
Yes.
So for a long time, we did all of it. And I had independent contractors who would tutor algebra and chemistry and all of that. When my youngest son went to kindergarten, I actually went through a divorce. And so I thought I really want to still keep my company. It was doing really well then, but I knew I needed to be on the same schedule as my boys who were still very young.
Yeah.
So at that point, I scaled back and just became fully writing, which I think was honestly the best move for me. I am since remarried. My husband's also an English teacher. And our kind of litmus test mark is we say, we sell blueberries. Is this blueberries? Because sometimes I get these like wild ideas like, oh, we should do this. And he's like, I remember we did that before. And when you diversify too much, like it can kind of pull away from what you actually are really great at. So we've had just exclusively writing for years. And COVID actually really propelled us because we were able to move online. Okay. Before that, we were working in person with students in schools in Richmond. So now we're all over. We work with students all over the U.S. And we have 7 writing coaches that work with us.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's been great.
That's. And I have to ask the AI question.
Yes.
How is that integrated to your delivery or your augmentation of what you offer?
Right.
How the kids are showing up, the students are showing up to learn about writing. Is it different now? How they're what they're being expected?
I do think it would be naive to say it's not different. So I think I was fortunate, Mark. I was still teaching in the classroom. I taught International Baccalaureate and AP classes at the upper level in our for our juniors and seniors before I went over to higher ed. And AI, ChatGPT hit that last year I was there. And in the K-12 sector, the teachers freaked out, right? They're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? This is going to totally change the way we're interacting with students and language. In that same year, I went to the university and they were like, this is the best thing ever. We're going to harness this and we're going to have a minor about it. We're going to really embrace this and learn how to do it ethically. So it was really cool to kind of see that juxtaposition. So we've tried to look at it with an open mind that it's not going anywhere. So we're really have honest conversations with our students about why it's still important to learn how to write and establish your own voice. I would argue as people become like experts in their field, AI is a great tool to kind of slug through some of the stuff that takes a lot of time, emails and things like that. But I would argue for students who are learning their craft of writing, we really stress the importance of not using AI for the writing part. Some of them will use it for like organizational parts, but it's a daily struggle to kind of talk with students about that for sure.
Interesting. I read somewhere that you can no longer expect a student to independently write an essay on a book at home to then submit it as part of their English lit or whatever English assessment, because you're not going to get something authentic.
No, I don't think so. And I think part of it is now like the AI checkers aren't very valid. So there's a lot of privacy issues with that, like putting student work into an AI checker. Like, are you violating their privacy by throwing it on there? So I know a lot of schools honestly have gone back to like paper and pencil for some different assessments. I'm actually in a course right now at the university and we have to cite how we used AI. So there's that understanding that people will use it. So what does it look like, and having, ownership and honesty to kind of disclose how you're using it. So I think that the universities in this K-12 sector is still really trying to navigate what those policies look like. The problem is right now there aren't any policies. It's very
and I wonder if there's an opportunity to almost mentor or pair up the K-12 teachers that had that attitude that you described, and then the university professors or academics, lecturers, researchers that had a different response to it, and then see if there's some sort of hybrid confidence building maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think there could be a lot learned from both sides of what they're seeing. I agree.
Yeah. So writing is a core part of your work. So how do you think then with AI, but also not, you can carve out AI in this response if you want. Like how do you believe communication skills are changing? How are they being influenced? I have a bias to keep saying young people, but I'm conscious that you could be having learners of any age, of any of any background. So I've definitely got an age bias when it comes to education, when I talk about education. So your learners, not your young learners, just your learners in general,
Right.
how are you finding they're embracing communication in the 21st century?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen a huge shift, I would argue, even since the pandemic. So I have MS, Mark, so I stayed home. Some of our school districts actually stayed open during COVID. My husband and I stayed home. He has 2 boys, I have 3 boys. So our blended family, we had 7 of us teaching and learning at home,
Wow.
which was organized chaos. But when we went back to the classroom in 2021, some of those students, like I said, it's still been in school in 2020. So the first thing I noticed was just that kids, it felt weird. Like they weren't communicating in class. Classrooms were really quiet. So, I mean, it was just a very strange phenomenon. And I did a book study, and the kids, they were 10th graders, they were all in like learning circles. And normally, they'd be talking about the book or have these little discussion questions. And this one group was dead silent. And I walked over and I was like, all right, y'all, this is great. Nobody's talking. And they're like, we are talking. And I was like, there's no sound coming out of any of your mouths. And they're like, no, we're talking on the Google Doc. So they were sitting in this little circle, but they were just talking to each other over a Google document. And I realized right then and there, I was like, okay, this is really different. But that's what they had to do during the pandemic. So they were, separated. So they had to like sit spaced out, and that's how they talked. So that actually prompted us to change the model of how we teach our online writing classes. We used to teach just one-on-one, and we moved to something called an SLC, which is the small learning community. So we have groups of 5 students. And so we have really found that has helped, because they wouldn't turn their cameras on in the beginning. There was really awkward interaction. Just, it was different. I mean, I've worked with teenagers my whole life, and all of a sudden it just felt different. So I think communication is extremely important, especially with the students I'm working with at the university level who will go into healthcare. So we talk a lot with our parents about that, not just written communication, but can you hold a conversation? Can you interview somebody, right? So I talked about those early years with the newspaper where students love to go out and talk with people. That's not what I was seeing after the pandemic.
Right. Yeah, and we used to run, well, we do run, not used to, we do run Equal Engineers, my business. We run mentoring programs where we connect students up with engineers in industry. And there's just something, you've been running it for about 6 years now. But we started doing careers fairs at pre-pandemic, sort of 2017, 2018, where we'd have all the in-person interactions. But there's something about the group coming through now that are either graduating now or about to graduate, that communication just it's like we've got engagement on that program. Well, it was always a little bit, you got it really right sometimes, and other times it's just based on chemistry.
Right.
But then it feels like sort of across the piece, it just went boom, completely tanked. And we were like, what have we done something different here? Is something different? And then it occurred to us, like, well, if you think about it as a function of time, the groups that we're seeing now graduate are those that did their secondary education, majority of their secondary education, 2 or 3 years in the pandemic, on a rolling set of lockdowns, on a variation of legal requirements as to whether or not, I mean, in some places in the UK, it was a choice. Like, you didn't have to go to school. You could have stayed at home. When it wasn't everyone must stay at home and no one's allowed to be anywhere. Then when it became sort of parental choice, depending on your attitude and if you were, if you were a vulnerable patient, etc., individual. But so I feel like there's a group of people, I'm not stereotyping, but generally we sort of see, it's like they had, I don't know, I don't, it's all anecdotal because we don't do enough at a scale. I'm not going to run a research study to like validate the engagement on our program, but it just feels like there's something where it just happens to be too much of a coincidence.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think a lot of it goes back to that just so much of the communication is digital for our students. And I think what you're speaking about, Mark, we talk a lot about at the university. And as an academic advisor, my first 2 years advising, I just worked with first year students. So I knew their world they were coming from, much better than the world they were entering. And I would have conversations with students and they would say, Meg, I don't leave my dorm. And I kept trying to think about when I was a freshman in college, I was lucky I got through my first semester because you're running around and you're, super social. But they could take all
Yeah.
their classes online. And so, a lot of departments kind of reconfigured, all right, well, let's do this class in person. Let's get these students in because, there's organic things that happen. I'm a huge advocate of online. Obviously, we can have a conversation, between the US and the UK. There's
Yeah.
a lot of proponents to being online. But our former Surgeon General, actually just released a statement a couple weeks ago on LinkedIn. And when I think of the Surgeon General, I think of like smoking warnings, right? Well, his warning was about the epidemic of isolation and loneliness in the U.S. And so that
Yeah.
was really
Yeah.
profound for me because it's something we were feeling anecdotally, like you said. But I think a lot of organizations and schools and programs are getting more intentional about making sure students have those interactions so they have those skills. Because if you're always just talking through a screen, it's different when you're in a room all of a
Yeah.
sudden now with a bunch of people.
Do you know, hauntingly, and it makes me sad because it flies in the face of all the work that Eco Engineers does and the stuff that underpins the ethos of my book, The Safe Leader, etc., which deals with sort of the suicide rate in
Right.
engineering and manufacturing and
Okay.
construction. I was listening to another Simon Sinek podcast the last couple of weeks, and he said, and they were I can't remember whose guest was, but basically they were talking about the confluence of AI, isolation, loneliness, jobs being taken up, and new jobs being created, but at a different skill level, and about how the human brain is still, we haven't had an upgraded operating system in our brains
Right.
really for the time that we've been in existence.
Right.
So we are still quite primordial in terms of our responses and our basic needs. So he said one of the metrics to keep an eye on over the next few decades and beyond is the suicide rate. That will it go up
Right.
with the onset of all this easier, faster to do things, less human connection needed, less things in real life.
Right.
And it really, I was driving and I was listening to it, and it really sort of stopped me in my tracks. I thought, I hadn't thought of this in that way.
Yeah.
I've
I
kind of been in reactive mode to the cultures that we have as they are today, but I've never thought of the risk of AI and the fundamental change it could have to lead to those sort of outcomes.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that those people are forward thinking about what's going to happen before it happens. And I'm sure we'll chat about this later, but that was part of my decision to launch Women in Change because
Yes.
I've always worked in a school setting. And so for the first time in my life, I'm a huge extrovert. I found myself working a hybrid schedule, which I thought, oh, this is going to be great. When you're teaching, you're running around like your hair's on fire. But all of a sudden, I'm at home all day and I'm like, where are all the people, right? So I started talking with other women who were like, it's really lonely sometimes to, you're in these leadership roles, so it's still high stress, but you don't have, you can't walk out in the hall and kind of
Go to the coffee cooler.
And
Yeah,
go blow
go grab a coffee in the staff room.
right.
Yeah.
So I think that part of my mission with that is there's still an educational piece to it, but I think it's really important to be intentional about connection because our world is different. So trying to get out in front of some of those crises that I think could be pending, right, is to ensure that people have those connections even if our setup is different.
So tell us about the Women in Change
Yeah.
then, the US hub. It's not a movement I've heard of before. So please,
Right. Yeah.
tell
So
us about it.
I was fortunate to be on a podcast with a woman out of the UK, and she was telling me about this group that she was involved in, and I started researching it, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is awesome. So basically, Mark, I'm sure you're aware, but in the US now with some recent policy changes, a lot of our DEI structure is no longer
Yeah.
in existence.
I'm,
So
I'm critically aware of that. Having lived in New York for a year from August 24 to August 25,
Okay.
when all that came into play,
Yeah.
yes, I am aware.
yeah, so it's just a really kind of strange world to navigate. And so my doctoral capstone, they do it a little bit different in the program that I was in. I was paired with a woman who is an FBI she does data analytics, and then a police officer who is native to Trinidad but grew up in the US, and then myself. So we had three very different lived experiences, and we analyzed. It was for a federal law enforcement agency. They wanted us to look at their hiring practices through their use of social media. So how are they portraying themselves on social media, and how is that being received? And it was fascinating. And then we were able to present to this, to this federal agency, and then everything went kaput, right? So it was like a year's worth of work was like, okay, well, now that doesn't really matter. The goal was 30 by 30. So they wanted 30% female law enforcement by 2030. Well, obviously all those programs went by the wayside. So that was really heartbreaking, I think, to kind of see the needle move and then see it not. So when I heard about Women in Change, basically I would argue they're like the Brene Browns of the UK. These were all women who are in governance in London, and they're in change management.
Okay.
And so, so they, have different hubs there in the UK, and they meet up, and they're talking about their industry. So I met with them, and I said, I'm not in change management, but I think we're all change agents. So what does that look like if we did something similar in the US? And so she said, yeah, you have autonomy to do what you want to do, as long as you kind of follow the same mission that we do. So we launched Women in Change in January, and we're cross-sector. So I have an advisory council of women who are in engineering, tech, education, construction management. And the goal really is to bring these women leaders together to kind of talk about different issues, because I think we get siloed like in our own industry. And so it's been really awesome so far. It's brand new. We just started, but it's been
fabulous. How fresh is it? How new?
Super fresh. Just a few months, January. So
awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's been great.
That sounds incredible. What have you got planned then? What's on the work plan for year one?
Right. So we have different speakers that talk each month about different topics that were submitted. So it's everything from connection, like we talked about, like leading with courage, inclusion. We have a couple of speakers from the UK that are talking about, various different topics, just basically that women submitted. And then we have 4 in-person events here in Richmond. They're called long lunches. And so we're gathering at women-owned restaurants and businesses and having different leaders come in and speak. And it was funny because the long lunches in the UK are 4 hours. And I said, that will never happen in the US. There's you're not going to be able to
4 hours.
Get somebody for 4 hours. So we do 2. But it's been great. So we have our next one next month.
That when I was living in the US, and Trump brought in his illegal DEI stuff.
Right.
It is the one thing I was sort of sitting waiting to see, was all the minority group X organizations or entities just evaporate. But that didn't happen.
No.
And I was really pleased actually to see organizations like the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. They kept their Pride programming, stuff that they had planned for Pride. I went down to DC to help launch one of their initiatives to coincide with World Pride, which was in DC last year. And also there was I guess it was New York, so maybe it's shielded a little bit, but the Small Business Administration, the SBA there through the New York Mayor's office, all that sort of support was continuing for minority-owned businesses through procurement and supply chain piece. I went up to Connecticut and met some women in construction, I think, entities and organizations. So it felt like there was still a bit of a hubbub, and I personally joined the NGLCC New York chapter and built a bit of a network that way through networking events and stuff that I went to. So it felt like people were just sort of realigning to go private into coalition building and private, ready hopefully for this new emergence, but to recognise that change does still need to happen. I don't know if you follow Jennifer Brown.
No.
You don't. She's a brilliant DEI thought leader. Okay. She's based in New York, actually. But she's had some really interesting thoughts through her podcast, The Will to Change, recently, even in just the last year, about how this is this is a necessary process to get ready for what the next shift is going to be in transition. And yeah, so I personally, I don't think it's surprising that what has happened has happened.
Right.
I think when one sort of seeks one's tribe and you get addicted to that sort of feeling of inclusion that comes when you then feel that sense of belonging, like, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Right. And I don't think we've always really been thinking about the reaction of the majority. And what we've seen is this spillover, feeling like things have gone too far, and then leveraging that for the in the wrong way to win hearts and minds of people. So hopefully we can that really is the sort of area that I play in with the Safe Leader. It's recognizing that white, straight, able-bodied, neurotypical men are also diverse and are also have a diversity story to share, have been through trauma, and because they're men, they're not really great at sharing that, and that's why we've got a really high suicide rate in construction engineering and in men. In fact, I think suicide's one of the biggest killers of men under 40 or something. Right. And that's really what used to always baffle me as a safety engineer by background, because the whole point of safety is to create a safe working environment where you can be yourself and you can go home after work without a broken leg or without an injured mind. You know?
No, for sure.
So there's so much potential there, I still feel, in the US as well. But I really wanted to launch big and fly high over there. But I think, we decided to move back to the UK because it was just getting a bit much.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it was fear-based, right, in terms of, hey, we're going to do all these things. And so people kind of go into a panic, right? And so when that happens, in my opinion, Mark, the institutions start proactively getting rid of things, right? Because they're like, this is going to happen. And I think that was part of the push, right? Like, I don't know how much of the shutting down of all the different organizations would have actually happen. I mean, I guess it would have, but it's tricky because even like within a university, you can't say like this women's group, because that is something that can't happen. So what I liked about Women in Change, and we had a male speaker, a black man from Canada who came in, was our speaker, right? So we were trying to show that it's an inclusive environment, but we're promoting women in leadership because, you know, that's what we're doing. But I think it's one of those things that I would actually argue it created a lot of momentum for those groups. Like, I know I'm a part of NAACP and the ACLU here, and like their numbers went up, right? So people, and a couple people reached out and they said like, hey Meg, I know you do ACLU, like what do you have to do for that? What does that look like? And I think for us, Mark, I grew up, like I mentioned, outside of DC, but where I live in Richmond, the city is very inclusive, but the surrounding areas are not necessarily. And the county where I taught was the second to last integrated county after Brown v. Board in the U.S. So, or maybe not in the U.S., but definitely in Virginia. And one of our districts in Virginia shut down for 5 years instead of facing integration after Brown versus Board integrated our school systems. So when what we're kind of seeing at the national level, I was feeling about 10 years ago in the district. So this is something that we saw coming. We had massive book bans in our schools. That's actually what made me leave the school system and go into higher ed. That was the final catalyst when they came and banned over 200 books. And took them right off my shelves. And I had a student look at me and she was like, when are they going to start banning the straight kids books? And I was like, oh my gosh, right? So, you know, that was a huge eye-opener to me of what was coming, and then now it's here. So I think, like you said, it can kind of ebb and flow, and it's just trying to figure out how you can make all people feel safe, to your point, which is not an easy task, I think, especially now.
No, it's not. And that's why it's so important to your point earlier, when one tries to go too expansive and not be effective and too dilute, actually to know your niche, to know where your skill sets are, your strengths are, and then to embrace the entrepreneurial spirit in what it is that you shape or the communities that you seek to build and where you give your energy to. that's where you'll be most effective, and then activate that endorphin releasing loop for yourself, because you then see the fruits of your labour bear impact through the people or the structures that you're setting or the people that you're teaching.
Right.
So when you think about the future then, if you could redesign education from the ground up, what would you prioritise as a future focus for this decade?
It's funny you asked this. I was on a podcast a couple months ago with a young podcaster. He was probably in his early 20s out of Germany. And he said, Dr. Waldron, don't you think it's going to be like a classroom of like 200 people and then there's just like an AI moderator? And I was like, oh my gosh, right? Because for me, Mark, like education.
I hope not.
Right. But I said, I just feel like education is relational and it has to be relevant. So I mean, as a parent to 5 young men, right, if it's not relevant, they don't want to do it. Like if they can't figure out what is the point of this and how is it going to, help me in the future or help somebody else, like, why am I doing it? So I think schools have started to catch on to that. Vocational tech was kind of like, if you went to VOTech when we were kids, it was like, oh, they're not college bound. Now we have students that are getting certified in welding and they're going to college, right? So I think that they are starting to realize that education looks different for different students, and they need to know their why and why they want to do it. And I talk to pre-med students every day, and there are some that are so passionate about what they're doing, and then there's some that have just thought they were supposed to be a doctor since they were young, right? So I think it's continuing to have those conversations and to continue to make sure that school is relevant and that relationships are at the core of what we're doing, and we're not just pushing students through these tests and whatnot.
What do you think about in terms of the developing world and AI offering an opportunity to democratize access to education? And in the absence of not getting an education, this could be a way to still give education.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really have not thought about that, but I think that's a brilliant idea. I mean, I think that there are areas of the globe where people do not have access to education. So I think that there will be really awesome ways to harness and utilize technology. But I also really feel that it's really important that we don't take the human out of teaching. I think that is a big part of having a mentor and a teacher.
Completely agree. All right. Quick fire questions. Are you ready?
I guess. I haven't looked at them, so it's going to be a authentic response.
You're not supposed to anyway. Right.
Oh, okay, good.
What's one myth about education you'd love to bust?
That you're too old to learn.
What's the most underrated skill for student success?
Most underrated skill by far would be the barrier you placed on yourself. So having that resilience.
What's a book that shaped your thinking?
To Kill a Mockingbird.
One habit every student should build early on.
Time management.
A phrase you hear too often in education.
When will I ever use this again?
What's your ideal way to recharge?
Writing.
A challenge that turned into a defining moment.
Being diagnosed with MS.
Finally, what's one word that defines great leadership in education?
Understanding.
Amazing. That's so true. I'm conscious we never spoke much about your MS or anything in that.
Oh, that's okay. That's fine.
And we're we often, one of our focus areas is like not all disabilities are visible. Some stuff is invisible. So how have you found like your work-life balance, and then when did you get your diagnosis? Was it whilst you were? Yeah, because I'm just conscious people that tune into our podcast, and you've said that a couple of times there, and it's not. I haven't intentionally not given it oxygen. It hasn't come up. But if you're comfortable sharing a bit, we'd love to.
Absolutely, no. I always share with my students, because a lot of our students bring different situations to the table, and so for me, I was diagnosed with MS after my third son was born, and I talk with my students openly about it, because I think. A lot of times if you have a disability, it's like you have your disability and you lead with that, but I would just say it's part of my life. There are days that I'm on and I can like roll all day. There's days that I can't. So I always try to encourage my students to be open with what other parts of their life. We bring our whole self to work, our whole self to school. So I've been fortunate that it's pretty under control. I walked the Camino a year ago. Yesterday, we did 100 miles through Spain and Portugal. So
Wow.
I think my MS has been my greatest teacher, to be honest with you, because you kind of know that it's there. So you have to be conscientious to try to stay healthy with it too.
You have to manage your energy levels correctly.
Oh,
or
yeah,
sort of,
for sure.
no, yeah, no. I remember working with someone who shared
Yes.
as well that they lived with it, and so yeah, it was the first personal encounter I'd had with someone
Right.
who where I had like learned experience of the condition rather than just what I'd read about
Right.
or seen online. I think that's what's so important about role models as well, isn't it? Or people being real models.
Right.
Sometimes we say role model or real model. Role model can make it sound like you're putting someone up on a pedestal and expecting a lot
Yeah.
of them, but actually, just to your point, you live with it. It's part of who
of it.
you are. It's
Yeah.
part of the tapestry of who makes you you, and it's a good thing sometimes maybe for people to know that about you, because then in a moment where there's a flare up or it's showing up and it's affecting you,
Sure.
then people already know about it and you can cite that.
Yeah.
And
I think it's also made me just much more empathetic. So I think when I first started teaching and a student would say, I have migraines, I was like, okay, well, you have a paper due still. So, I don't think I really fully understood what some of those silent conditions can look like. So I'm much more empathetic. I also share it because I work with students going into healthcare. So I remind them, when they're running tests and labs on somebody, like that's somebody's mom, that's somebody's, caretaker. So I think it kind of humanizes it. So I don't obviously talk about it with people all the time, but I think in moments where students will say, hey, I've been dealing with this thing. It might be depression. It might be, something physical. Oftentimes I'll share with them, hey, like, that's okay. Like that's part of your journey and it's not going to define you, but it's good to be cognizant of what that looks like and how it might change how you work.
brilliant. Thank you so much, Meg. Really enjoyed our chat. If people want to find out more about your work and what you do, how should they do that?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, and then Women in Change USA is also on LinkedIn, and then Smart Solutions also on LinkedIn, and I'm sure you'll have our websites in the bio. But any of those they can find me at.
Absolutely, and I'm going to go and look up Women in Change as well, and
Yes,
see if there,
they'd be a great.
Maybe there are some webinars or something coming up I can subscribe to or join.
They have a global event happening on April 23rd, so there you go.
Oh, right. Okay, this week.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll check it out. Brilliant.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for the work you do, Mark. I appreciate it.
You have been listening to the Safe Leader podcast, uncovering the diversity story behind leading figures championing change to make our world a better place. If you have enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to the Safe Leader podcast on your podcast platform of choice and get notified when a new episode goes live. Did you know that we also offer a full transcript on each of our podcast episodes? Check out my website, markmcbridewright.com. Here, you can also explore the training, coaching, and keynote speaking services I offer. And whilst you're there, why not join the Safe Leader community by subscribing to the Safe Leader Insights mailing list? Thank you for listening, and please come back and join us on a future episode.